We call this meeting of the Small Business Committee to order. We're here today to talk about three important programs that were created to help small business compete for federal contracts. We look at the Offices of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. There is an acronym for that, and I can't pronounce it, so I will be calling it OSDBU. We also look at the Procurement Center and Commercial Market Center Representatives programs, and we look into the Mentor-Protege program. The primary focus of the OSDBU is advocating for small business contracts and fighting unjustified bundling. To underscore the importance of this effort, when Congress created these provisions in 1978, they required that each OSDBU, with the exception of the Department of Defense, that they would answer only to and directly to the agency head or deputy agency head. So it was answering very high up the chain. The Procurement Center Representatives Program and the Commercial Market Representatives Program are made up of small business administration employees, and their focus is to ensure that small businesses have the opportunity to compete for prime contracts and that there are small business opportunities at the subcontract level. In fact, PCRs are one of the most important defenses small businesses have against contract bundling because they have the ability to protest procurements up to the head of the contracting agency when a contract fails to provide for small business participation. The third program, which is really a conglomeration of 13 individual programs, is the Mentor-Protege program, and this could also be an important tool to help small business become more competitive. Generally speaking, the program allows small, less experienced firms to be mentored by larger, more experienced firms with the goal of increasing the participation of small businesses in government contracting. Small business contractors are good for the government and good for the economy. They increase competition, innovation, create jobs, and they save taxpayers money. Which is why there's a statutory goal of awarding 23% of prime contract dollars to small businesses. However, recent reports reveal that these programs could and should do a little better. For example, last year when the federal government spent over $500 billion through government contracts, the administration fell short of that 23% goal, and only about 20% of those prime contract dollars actually made it to small businesses. Given the achievement gap, we're going to continue to look at ways to help small businesses compete. But we also must address the several agencies that are refusing to comply with the Small Business Act and thus making the problem worse. For example, when we were looking at the OSDBU practices, the GAO found 7 agencies that were not complying with the law regarding their reporting requirements. To find out why, my office actually sent letters to the heads of each of those agencies on August 5th. That was almost 6 weeks ago. Thus far, only 3 agencies have bothered to respond. The responses range from the Social Security Administration saying that it would change its practices to bring it in compliance with the law, to the Treasury saying that it was going to keep its policy even though it violated the law. I can assure you that we will have future hearings on those agencies as well as the agencies that had decided not to respond to the congressional inquiry. In addition to addressing those challenges on OSDBUs, we're going to examine the PCR and CMR programs today. I hope our witnesses will also be able to address ways in which we can strengthen both of these programs, whether it be looking at measures of effectiveness, addressing the challenges that the programs have identified, prioritizing workloads, or looking at ways in which technology can help us do the job. Finally, and then I'll close, within the 13 different Mentor-Protege programs, the eligibility requirements vary widely, as do the types of assistance provided to the proteges and the incentives provided and encouraged to the mentors. GAO studied the controls for each of those programs and looked at how each tracked success. I look forward to hearing more about the GAO findings, how issues like affiliation play out in these programs, and whether having so many independent programs puts an unnecessary burden on the participants. As the Small Business Jobs Act allows the SBA to create additional specialized mentor programs, I look forward to learning more about their plans for the future. As this committee considers the PCRs, CMRs, OSDBUs, and whatever other acronyms we can throw into that mix, we want to learn how to help strengthen and improve all of these programs. If we succeed, we'll be able to help small business, which is the goal of everybody who's on this committee. So with that, I yield to Ms. Chu for opening comments, and then we'll talk to the witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since the financial crisis of 2008, small businesses have faced a challenging economic environment, and for this reason, the federal marketplace has become an increasingly attractive option. In fact, the reality is that doing business with government is vital for many firms' success. Historically, however, it's been difficult for small businesses to gain a toehold in the federal procurement system. The passage of procurement reforms in the 1990s has led to bigger and more consolidated contracts, At the same time, the federal acquisition workforce has declined, failing to keep up with the explosive growth in procurement activity. When combined with the sheer complexity of the system, this has left many entrepreneurs on the outside looking in. To help small businesses overcome these barriers, several initiatives were established. While the most well-known resources were set aside and restricted competition programs of the SBA, there are several other tools that have great promise. These include the Mentor-Protégé programs, the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, which I shall call OSDBU, and Procurement Center Representatives, the PCRs. Through different mechanisms, these initiatives enable small firms to gain great access to federal contracts that they would not otherwise be able to serve. This is accomplished in two ways. First, the OSDBUs and PCRs provide oversight of contracts, looking for opportunities in which small businesses can serve not only as a prime contractor, but also as a subcontractor on much broader projects. Second, through the Mentor-Protégé program, smaller firms are given the opportunities to work directly with large vendors. This can provide them with vital experience and lead to future opportunities. Together, these creative efforts are an important means to getting more federal contracts in the hands of small businesses. While they do show great promise, recent GAO reports suggest there's a long way to go until their full potential is realized. GAO found that while Mentor-Protégé programs have policies in place to make sure that participants benefit, agencies generally do not know what impact such participation has on a business's ability to win contracts without the mentor. Similarly, the GAO reported that SBA's government contracting area report data may not be accurate. In both cases, accurate data is so critical because without it, the agencies can't determine how well their staff has performed or if the program's goals are being achieved. Perhaps more troubling was GAO's finding with regard to the OSDBUs. Although it's statutorily required that they have direct access to the highest levels of the agency, that is far from the case. 7 of the 16 federal agencies were not in compliance with this requirement, and this only shortchanges small businesses that end up suffering the consequences of OSDBU's diminished agency standing. Together, GAO's reports paint a troubling picture of the agency's implementation and oversight of these important small business assistance initiatives. With a sluggish economy, it's absolutely critical that programs like these succeed and are successful in bringing more entrepreneurs into the federal procurement marketplace. With small businesses making up more than 99% of all American companies, but receiving fewer than 1/4 of federal contracts, these efforts could broaden the economic benefits of federal contracts and create jobs in communities across the nation. For each 1% increase in share of contracts going to small businesses, 100,000 new jobs are created. And with unemployment above 9%, we should be finding ways to make this happen and make sure that small businesses have the tools they need to succeed. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mrs. Chu. At this time, I'd ask you, please, to begin the introduction of our witnesses.
Well, thank you, and I am so pleased to introduce William Scheer, who is the Director of Financial Markets and Community Investment at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Bill has directed substantial bodies of work addressing the Small Business Administration, housing finance, and including the role of the housing GSEs, the Rural Housing Service, and community and economic development programs. Mr. Scheer will also be directing a report that the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus requested last year on outreach, development programs, and resources designed to connect minority-owned businesses to contracting opportunities. I look forward to that report, and I look forward to hearing your testimony today and working with you on future reports.
Thank you, and welcome, Mr. Scheer. The next witness is Ji-Young Park, the Associate Administrator of the U.S. General Services Administration's Office of Small Business Utilization. Ms. Park manages and oversees GSA's small business policy and programs, which strive to expand opportunities in federal government procurement for small, disadvantaged, woman-owned, and historically underutilized business zones and service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses. During her tenure, Mrs. Park also started the GSA's Mentor-Protege program, I believe. So thank you and welcome. Sitting next to her is Joseph Jordan. Mr. Jordan has served as the Associate Administrator of the Government Contracting and Business Development at the U.S. SBA since March of 2009. The Office of Government Contracting and Business Development works to create an environment for maximum participation by small, disadvantaged, and women-owned businesses in federal government contract awards and large prime subcontract awards. It also plays a major role in the formulation of federal procurement policies that affect small businesses. I just read some of that yesterday. That was scintillating reading. There's no question about it. So about 24 pages, single-spaced. So anyway, Mr. Jordan, thank you, and thank you all. We'll begin, I believe, with Mr. Scheer.
Chairman Mulvaney, Ranking Member Chu, and members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased to be here to discuss our recent work on the federal government's efforts to increase contracting opportunities for small businesses. My testimony today discusses 3 reports we issued in June 2011. Specifically, I will discuss our work on, first, the reporting structure at and the functions performed by offices of small and disadvantaged business utilization, often called OSDBUs, in agencies with major contracting activity. Second, the Mentor-Protege programs at 13 federal agencies. And third, SBA's Procurement Center representatives and commercial market representatives. In summary, we found the following and made recommendations for improvements. First, we found that 9 of the 16 agencies we reviewed were in compliance with the Small Business Act's requirements that OSDBU directors be responsible only to and report directly to the agency or deputy agency head. However, 7 were not. We recommended that the 7 agencies act to comply with the requirement. The Social Security Administration agreed with the recommendation, and the Department of the Interior agreed to reevaluate its reporting structure. The Departments of Commerce, Justice, State, and the Treasury disagreed, stating they were in compliance. We maintained our position on these agencies' compliance status. Since issuance of our report, Interior has indicated that it will work closely with Congress in seeking a statutory exemption. Second, while controls existed at all 13 federal agencies with Mentor-Protege programs to help ensure that participants met eligibility criteria and benefited from the program, the agencies generally did not track protege achievements after program completion. We recommended that 10 agencies consider doing so. 6 of the 10 agencies, Homeland Security, Energy, GSA, HHS, Treasury, and VA, generally agreed with our recommendation. State partially agreed with our recommendation, citing concerns about the impact that post-completion reporting could have on the department, mentor firms, and protege firms. Since issuance of our report, VA indicated that it will collect data from the protege for 1 year after enactment, and EPA indicated it would evaluate whether its program should continue, and if so, what improvements should be made. Third, although SBA had some measures to assess the effectiveness of PCRs and CMRs, select data these staff reported were not reliable, and report controls and reviews had weaknesses. We recommended that SBA take measures to improve data reliability and internal controls. SBA agreed with our recommendations and has been updating guidance for the PCR and CMR programs to provide clear instructions for reporting. SBA also said it would implement a method to verify and review the PCR and CMR documentation. For the purpose of this statement, I will just state here that we do address resource challenges with the PCR and CMR community. It's in a written statement. Chairman Mulvaney, Ranking Member Chu, this concludes my statement. I would be happy to answer any questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Scheer. And just a word to the witnesses. We're not under some of the same time constraints that we have been in previous meetings, so you will see the lights go off in front of you. Green means you're well within your 5 minutes. Yellow means you've moved within a minute, and red means you're over your 5 minutes. But I will assure you that given the fact that we're not under the gun here today, if you need to go a minute or two over, we'd much rather get more information rather than less. So don't feel constrained completely by the 5 minutes. And with that, Ms. Park.
Good morning, Chairman Mulvaney, Ranking Member Chu, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate being invited here this morning to discuss the U.S. General Services Administration's Mentor-Protege program, and I'd like to submit my written testimony for the record. The purpose of GSA's Mentor-Protege program is to leverage private sector expertise to assist small businesses and enhance their ability to compete for federal government contracts. Navigating federal contracting can be complex and daunting, and GSA's Mentor-Protege program is an easy-to-navigate program that helps reduce barriers to bringing small business, private sector partners to the government. GSA established its Mentor-Protege program in September 2009, and over the past 2 years, we have developed a robust program that is already yielding tangible results in the form of contracts awarded and jobs created. Now, our program success is a testament to the commitment and hard work of the GSA team, and in particular of our program manager, Tony Island, who's also here today. And I should point out and clarify that I unfortunately cannot accept credit for standing up the program as it was in motion before I arrived at GSA, so I just wanted to make that clear. But we have been working on it together as a team and very proud of the accomplishments. And more importantly, our success is due to the program participants themselves. Proteges have reported 41 new contracts, one as a result of assistance received from their mentors, with a total value at up to $260 million, including, in some cases, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts with high dollar ceilings spanning multiple years. We have also seen significant subcontract awards from mentors to their proteges. Proteges have reported 54 new subcontracts from their mentors. Last but not least, participants have reported creating 132 new jobs as a result of participating in the program. Some jobs were the result of new contract awards, and others were the result of mentors' assistance to expand existing contracts. Given today's economic climate, these new jobs certainly are a particularly important statistic. There are many specific examples of success I could share, but I'll share just 2 examples we've seen. One service-disabled veteran mentor helped its protege, another service-disabled veteran-owned small business, to bid on an opportunity by sharing tips on how to form a winning proposal team and by providing technical writing assistance on the proposal. As a result, the protege won an IDIQ valued at $50 million over the life of the contract. The mentor was not part of the contract team, which demonstrates the mentor's investment in the protege's business growth as a long-term strategic partner. Another protege firm struggled with proposal and bid decisions. The company was bidding on many opportunities without a clear focus. The mentor taught the protege how to develop a clear bid, no-bid review process and a targeted bidding strategy. After implementing this new process, the protege bid on 44 opportunities in a 6-month period, winning 11. The mentor's help made all the difference between the protege wasting valuable bid and proposal dollars and growing their bottom line. In total, we have 81 business proteges directly benefiting from guidance and assistance from their mentors. Our proteges are all small businesses representing all socioeconomic categories, including 8A or small disadvantaged business, women-owned small business, veteran and service-disabled veteran-owned small business, and those businesses located in historically underutilized business or hub zones. 45, or more than half of the proteges, are small businesses owned by veterans. In closing, GSA has high expectations for the continued success of our Mentor-Protege program. In this tightened fiscal climate, our goal is for GSA's Mentor-Protege relationships to spur innovation in the areas of information technology, open government, and high-performing and efficient green buildings, consistent with GSA's mission. The program can help drive government transformation, reduce government waste, and create high-paying American jobs. The 41 new contracts, 54 new subcontracts, and 132 new jobs the program has created are just the beginning. We look forward to continuing to improve GSA's Mentor-Protege program through collaboration with the program participants, SBA, other agencies, and following GAO's recommendations as well. For example, pursuant to GAO's recommendation, we have made steps to implement a post-completion assessment that will allow us to track protege firms' success after they exit the program. Now, our first graduation is anticipated to happen early 2012. I welcome the subcommittees to be back on questions, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Park. And again, we're going to save our questions to the end, so we'll move down to Mr. Jordan.
Thank you. Chairman Mulvaney, Ranking Member Chu, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting the U.S. Small Business Administration to testify today. Our top priority at SBA is to maximize opportunities for small businesses and ensure that the benefits of our programs flow to the intended recipients. My office works each day to provide increased opportunities for eligible small businesses to compete for and win federal contracts. We are always looking for ways to increase small business contracting opportunities, and I'm proud to say that in the 2.5 years I've been in my position, we have made significant and quantifiable improvements. The federal government spends about $500 billion every year through federal contracts, and it's with SBA's support and assistance, small businesses receive nearly $100 billion of that spend. In fiscal year 2010, small businesses won 22.7% of federal contracting dollars. This marks the second consecutive year of increase and the largest 2-year increase in over a decade. SBA is committed to meeting and exceeding the 23% statutory goal and getting more contracts into the hands of small businesses. At the same time, we are working to implement the provisions of the Small Business Jobs Act and eliminating fraud, waste, and abuse from all of our programs. With these priorities in mind, please allow me to discuss the 3 Government Accountability Office reports that are the subject of today's hearing. The first report concerned SBA's Procurement Center representatives, PCRs, and Commercial Marketing representatives, CMRs. These members of my team play a critical role in ensuring small businesses receive their fair share of government contracts. They are located at the largest federal agency buying activities across the country and work closely with acquisition teams at these agencies to ensure small business utilization is maximized. We recently conducted an analysis of our PCR and CMR functions and their roles and responsibilities. This analysis helped us determine how we can more effectively utilize these resources to increase opportunities for small business contracting. Our analysis also looked into whether we have appropriately allocated our PCRs and CMRs in the most effective and efficient way. Furthermore, in the fiscal year 2012 budget request, the President asked for additional full-time employees, including PCRs, to provide oversight for small business contracting programs and work towards eliminating fraud, waste, and abuse. The second GAO report is in regards to the Offices of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization that work in each federal agency. SBA works very closely with the directors and staff of these offices. We chair monthly meetings with the OSDBU directors to share program updates, discuss policy and regulatory changes, and discuss best practices. We also work with the OSDBU directors to set small business goals for their agency and help them develop plans to meet those goals. The report discusses Section 15K3 of the Small Business Act, which says that OSDBU directors should report to agency heads or deputy agency heads. SBA strongly supports the underlying policy set forth in this statute and is asking all agencies to ensure they are in compliance with the requirements. In fact, SBA Administrator Karen Mills recently sent a memorandum to all agency heads and deputy heads reinforcing the importance of this requirement and asking each agency to ensure they are in compliance. SBA strongly believes in the importance of the OSDBU role and works closely with the White House and Office of Federal Procurement Policy to engage senior officials at each agency on the importance of small business contracting and also keep those agencies accountable to their goals. The third and final report concerned Mentor-Protege programs. Mentor-Protege programs are arrangements in which mentors, typically experienced prime contractors, provide business development assistance to small business proteges. In return, the program provides incentives for mentor participation, such as credit towards subcontracting goals and additional evaluation points towards the awarding of contracts. Mentors may also enter into joint venture agreements with proteges to compete for government contracts. SBA currently runs and oversees one Mentor-Protege program, which is for participants in the 8A Business Development Program. However, the Small Business Jobs Act gave the agency authority to implement additional programs for HUBZone, women-owned, and service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses. We are in the process of implementing these new programs. Other federal agencies also have their own Mentor-Protege programs. SBA does not oversee the other agencies' Mentor-Protege programs, but we are supportive of efforts made to increase opportunities for small businesses to compete for and win federal contracts. In addition to sharing our views on the 3 GAO reports, I'd also like to take this opportunity to share with you 2 important initiatives our Office of Government Contracting and Business Development is currently focused on. The first is our effort to combat fraud, waste, and abuse in all small business contracting programs. We have no tolerance for fraud, waste, or abuse and have implemented a comprehensive 3-pronged strategy to identify, prevent, and pursue noncompliance or fraud across all of our government contracting programs. The 3 prongs of our fraud, waste, and abuse strategy are as follows. 1, effective certification processes. 2, continued surveillance and monitoring. And 3, robust and timely enforcement. The other issue I'd like to discuss is in regards to our HUBZone, or Historically Underutilized Business Zone program. With the public release of the 2010 census data, a number of existing areas will no longer be designated hub zones due to the statutory mandate to remove these past redesignated areas. This mandate will have an impact on thousands of existing hub zone firms who will no longer qualify for the program. Extending these firms' eligibility can only be done by Congress. SBA is happy and willing to work with Congress on any proposals related to this issue to promote economic development and employment growth in distressed areas. As demonstrated by the initiatives and efforts described in this testimony, SBA has taken great strides to strengthen our small business contracting programs and strategies for combating fraud, waste, and abuse. These efforts are critical in ensuring small businesses gain access to federal contracting opportunities so that they can grow their businesses and create jobs. Thank you for allowing me to share SBA's views and initiatives with you today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. And here's what's happened in the meantime. We have an unexpected vote, as you can see up on the board. So what we're going to try and do is, I think Mr. Kreitz has just a few minutes of questions. I'm going to let him ask his questions and then welcome you back if you want to come back. But I think Ms. Chu and I will be back at probably 10:45. So we'll do is go your questions now, Mr. Kreitz, and then Ms. Chu and I will come back after we adjourn for a few minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just have actually just 2-3 quick questions. Mr. Scheer, you had mentioned at one point that Commerce, Justice, Treasury, and there was a fourth that weren't compliant. And I think Interior and someone else.
It was State.
And State were not compliant.
Yeah.
So you say they're not compliant. They disagree. Is the final outcome that you just agree to disagree, or what comes next?
It's a complex question, even though it started out as a simple question. With Justice and State, we just looked at the reality of what the interaction was between the OSDBU directors and or the interaction with the heads of the agency or the absence thereof. It was strictly based on the facts that we collected from our audit. And we think the facts on that are quite clear. So we're at a disagreement there, and we state it. Continue to maintain. With Treasury and State, the disagreement is over what they have done is that they name somebody an OSDBU director who reports to the head or deputy head of the agency, but then they delegate the authority. And then they cite it's a legal argument dealing with delegated authority and whether it can be withheld or not. We think the delegated authority is withheld by implication in the Small Business Act in the relevant section. So it's a legal disagreement. What we do about all of this, the chairman raised a very good point. He has sent letters to these agencies. There's going to be oversight of these agencies. When we were writing our report reviewers said, what happens to an agency that's not in compliance? We said that there really aren't any sanctions, so maybe there'll be congressional oversight. That's one reason we put in our recommendation that if they're not going to comply, they should state in reporting to Congress why they do, to create some burden of proof on these agencies. So we're trying to move the ball forward, but there's a disagreement here.
You also mentioned that at some point that you mentioned resource challenges, that I guess some offices are, and I'm assuming what you're saying is that they don't have the funding to put in place some of the things that they need to do. This isn't the same issue, though.
No, it's a different issue, and it's an important one. So I'll thank you for asking that. With the PCRs and CMRs, starting a few years ago, we recommended to SBA that they do a resource assessment of the adequacy of the PCRs to basically to fulfill their responsibilities. In response to that, they have had an evaluation done, and Mr. Jordan referred to that evaluation.
Yeah.
That evaluation was not completed, and so therefore it wasn't shared with us during our work that I'm testifying on today. But we think there's some real resource issues here in terms of the ability of PCRs and CMRs to carry out their functions. and we think SBA should be close enough to the situation and be able to do evaluation of its own needs and share with the Congress and with us and other parties how they plan to address what seem to be shortcomings in the ability of PCRs to carry out their functions.
Good, good. Thank you. Ms. Park, the Mentor-Protege program, from the reading that I had, the reporting that comes post, is it not dictated that the reporting is from the mentor and the protege? I guess sometimes it's just the mentor that people go to, and sometimes it's a joint. And I'm curious, this is not clearly defined?
So in GSA's Mentor-Protege program, we currently conduct an assessment on a semi-annual basis of the proteges and the mentors jointly. They submit from both perspectives how the agreement is progressing, whether the expectations set forth are being met, what contracts have been won by the protege, what jobs have been created by the protege, and to what extent the mentors have fulfilled their commitment, and vice versa in terms of commitments and expectations being met. Now, what the GAO report guides GSA to do is to implement a post-completion evaluation so that if a mentor and protege have set up a one-year agreement after that 1 year has been completed, to then continue to track the progress to see to what extent proteges can compete successfully for contracts without the assistance of their mentor. So that's something we've already taken steps to implement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I'd hope to have Mr. West get some time. Mr. West, do you want to try and proceed, or do you want to come back?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. First question, the PCRs and CMRs, full-time or part-time positions?
These are full-time positions.
Okay, very well. We talked about meeting the 23% contracting stipulation. We're at 22.7. What are we as far as vet-owned, women-owned, minority-owned right now?
I can get you that. In 2010, so the small businesses overall were 22.7%, as you said. Women-owned small businesses were just over 4%. Small disadvantaged businesses were just under 8%. Service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses were 2.5%.
Okay.
And hubs-owned businesses were 2.8%.
Now, how does that relate to the statutory?
To their goals? I'm sorry. Yeah. So the women-owned businesses are 4% towards a 5% goal, okay. So about a little less than a percent short. SDBs were at 8% towards a 5% goal, so significantly exceeding. Okay. Service-disabled vets, 2.5% of a 3% goal, so 0.5% short. Okay. And hub zones, 2.8% of a 3%.
Very well. The last question. What do we see as the average amount of time that we have this mentor-protege relationship going on? Is it a long umbilical cord, short umbilical cord?
I'd be happy to answer that for GSA's program. We ask of the mentors at least a 1-year commitment as a requirement, and up to 3 years.
Okay. Do we see any instances of, some bundling from the mentors to the proteges as far as, getting them to come on as subcontractors, or are they truly operating independently to help people on contracts that are, I guess, separate from what their field of expertise is?
We have seen good contracts awarded both on the prime and the subcontract level to protege firms. Certainly, subcontracts are a great way for small businesses to enter the federal marketplace, either as a starting point or as continued ways to win federal contract work.
Okay.
And Congressman West, I'll just expand for the 8A Business Development's Mentor-Protege program. We did see some issues with the way that the joint ventures between those mentors and proteges were happening. And in March, we released the first comprehensive revision of the 8A regulations in more than a decade, which addressed a lot of the issues around that. So,
very well. That was a concern that I had.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Let's go vote.
Exactly. So we will adjourn. We will adjourn now until 11 o'clock, although I'll tell you, Ms. Chu and I will come back as quickly as we can to try and move through. So if you can stay in the area, that would be great. We'll adjourn until 11 o'clock. All right. And thanks again to everybody for sticking around. I apologize for the inconvenience. Unfortunately, it's something that neither Ms. Chu or I have any control over. But it was nice to welcome the 2 new members of Congress. We'll pick up on questions, and as my practice, I'll defer to my ranking member and let her ask to her heart's delight, and then I'll go last. So, Ms. Chu.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Park, you described some great progress that was made with the Protege Mentor program, and these 41 new contracts, $260 million worth of contracts. What I was wondering was, are there certain departments where this relationship works well more so than others? And the reason I ask is because we see with the OSDBU compliance that there's variation, a great deal of variation with the departments. And I'm wondering if there are certain departments, like, say, for instance, with the Department of Defense, where there is more compliance than with others, because it lends itself more to that, because there's a lot of subcontracting that goes on there. And if there is variation, how do we better enhance the other departments in this area?
Well, GSA's Mentor-Protege program focuses on, developing suppliers, subcontractors, and primes in industries where we do business. That's really in support of our mission. So right now we have, primarily in professional services, construction services related participants in the program, facilities maintenance as well. I don't know if there are, particular compliance hurdles that may be, limiting in other agencies' programs. I can speak about GSA's program. It's really open to any and all industries that GSA does business with. We have, seen interest primarily from those industries I mentioned that we do, preponderance of our business with. But certainly, it's open to any and all businesses, including those on the schedules in the schedules program.
So, do you see certain industries where it's easier to set up that kind of Mentor-Protege program?
Well, for us, I don't think it's really industry specific. Certainly, with our public building service, we primarily that's construction related services, facilities maintenance. So we do have a good number of participants from those industries. We also have participants from professional services, IT, management consulting and strategy services that are in the schedules program for GSA. So I really don't know that there are specific industry or industry specific challenges to participating, but certainly we see interest from particular firms in certain industries in support of where GSA spends money and where our contract dollars are.
Mr. Scheer, did you find any differences there?
I'm going to make a general statement about what we were mandated to do to kind of set up the answer, if I could. We thought it was great to receive a mandate from Congress to look at Mentor-Protege programs, partly that it seems like there's been very little evaluation of these programs, even though it's grown to 13. And even when we started, it seemed like everybody was shocked to hear that there were 13 programs. And it was, in a way, very good that we had a short time fuse. It was a mandate with a specific date. So it was good because we scoured the universe and we were able to describe the programs, at least the controls that are on paper, to operate these programs. And we could at least describe in our report how they vary. But the question you raise is an extremely important one. And as auditors, what we look at, we said, we did not test the controls of these various programs. And one of the first things that would go off in my mind, if we did have the time or in the future did look at the controls around these programs, is how about the agencies where it seems the OSDBUs do not play as prominent a role, do not have the right reporting structure, might have budget problems. We see it on the surface from just going into each agency. But you raise a great question that we hope that sometime in the future we'll be able to go in and get a better handle on, particularly on the agencies that seem to have OSDBUs that have limited staff resources and those that aren't reporting to the senior most levels, to see how well those programs are being carried out.
Thank you for that. Mr. Scheer, I also wanted to ask about the procurement center representatives, the PCRs, and your report recommends several options for increasing PCR effectiveness. Certain ones seem to be ones that could be implemented by the administration without any legislative action. For instance, increasing the face-to-face interactions, increasing server capacity, and improving the training. And has SBA responded to or implemented any of these actions?
In our report, we discuss these various options, and we discuss them with the PCR community. And so we explored these options. It's in the context that in the past, we have recommended that SBA has to assess its PCR workload and its resources for this activity. So what we found from that was consistent with the idea that most of these options do involve greater use of resources. So it's one of the reasons we've always been very anxious to hear about the evaluation that SBA had of their PCR resources and what results from that. And Mr. Jordan, alluded to that in terms of the President's 2012 budget request. So a lot of these have to do with greater resource availability, whether it's through IT or just basically having more people or increasing interaction by increasing travel budget. All these are kind of options that could improve PCR effectiveness.
And of course, I must ask Mr. Jordan.
Sure. Yes, we, as Mr. Chair says, we agreed with most, if not all, of the recommendations in the GAO report. We had already begun a proactive analysis of our procurement center representative and commercial marketing representative workload with an eye towards maximizing both the effectiveness of these folks in getting contracts awarded, both the prime and sub level to small businesses, but also the efficiency. And that's where we've got to figure out at which level is cross-functional performance important. So these folks also handle size protests, service disabled veteran small business status protests. They do surveillance reviews and some of these other functions what the GAO commented on, at which point is it very helpful to have them cross-trained and cross-functional versus that becomes a workload balancing challenge and you really want specialization. And we did conduct this robust analysis of both where they're located and what they are doing, and have started implementing some of those changes already and have implemented some of those changes already. But in addition, as the GAO noted, some of those workload and resource challenges really need to be addressed by increasing the workforce of the PCRs, and to keep from robbing Peter to pay Paul and taking them from somewhere else and then causing another problem, the President did ask for an increase in this workforce.
One of your recommendations, Mr. Scheer, was to allow PCRs to dispute procurement if their recommendations were not implemented. And I wasn't sure whether that one required legislation. Does it?
I'd have to defer to Mr. Jordan. I think it might require legislation to provide that, but I'm really not sure on that particular option. And I don't know, Joe, if you...
Which one is it again?
That's the one allowing the PCRs to dispute the procurement if their recommendation is not implemented. And also, I'd like to know why would their recommendations not be taken if they've gone to all this trouble to put such one together?
So we have an important tool right now in the PCR toolkit to address that issue, which is called the Form 70. And this is one of the things that makes PCRs as a cadre so effective and important, is that if they file a Form 70, that procurement that they are disagreeing with has to stop until there's a resolution. And as we all know, we've got an overworked contracting officer workload. They want to get things through quickly and done well, and so they don't want the procurement to stop. And it can be very helpful as a specter, not having to use it, but knowing that you could. And then we do use it sometimes, and there's a series of escalations if we continue to disagree between the buying activity that's issuing a contract and the PCR. So that actually is something that we do quite a bit. Now, the best situations are where procurement center representatives and the contracting officer workforces of the buying activities they cover are working together at the acquisition planning stage, at the program level, et cetera, so that you don't get to the end. But if a PCR disagrees that contracting officers trying to issue a contract to full and open competition, and the PCR believes, no, there are 2 more small businesses that could do this, you must set it aside, the PCR can stop that procurement until that's resolved. And then there's a series of protests that rise up all the way to the secretary level.
And do you know whether they are successful or not?
We find, one, again, the overwhelming majority of the time, it doesn't need to get to the actual issuance of a Form 70. Just saying we disagree to this level, we are going to, precipitates a conversation in which the disputes are resolved. And I don't know of really any cases in my 2.5 years here where, as it's gone up a chain of protests, we haven't agreed by the end.
And I'll apologize for bouncing back, but one of the options we looked at had to do with the role of PCRs if they disagree with the subcontracting plan, and that for them to take an action specific to a subcontracting plan would require statutory change for them to do that. So the Form 70 process, I really thank Joe Jordan for pointing out how the Form 70 process works, but there isn't the authority, the PCR doesn't have the authority to go through that type of Form 70 action when the objection is to the subcontracting plan.
Okay. Mr. Scheer, your report mentions that many of the OSDBU directors felt they had a lack of influence in the procurement process, and that hinders their responsibility, their ability to carry out their responsibility. And that the OSDBU directors seem to have a conflict with the authority of the contracting officers in the process. So is the tension between these offices intended, or does this need to be corrected?
There's 2 types of tensions here, and it's a great question. So first I'll start with the tension that I think is intended to be there, and that is OSDBU directors are in a position to be advocates for small businesses. And so they are there to create some tension so that when contracting officials are making awards, they're taking into account, they're doing the right market analysis, they're doing, taking the appropriate actions for set-asides. So it is to create a tension to carry out the Small Business Act provisions. So that we would refer to as a pretty healthy tension. There is some tension, and this especially seems to be present in those agencies that don't comply with the reporting structure. And those tend to be those where the structure, where we hear from OSDBU directors that, well, that function is taken care of by the contracting officials. Well, in the sense that there can be, in a reporting relationship, if it does create, if that conflict isn't there, if there's a different conflict, which is plays out where the OSDBU does not have enough influence, then it can lead to a result where they aren't able to really fulfill their purpose.
And do you think there should be an increase in the authority of the OSDBU, and is there a way to do that without adding to the complexity or length of the contracting process?
There seems to be 2 issues that are most associated with what I'll call the prominence of the OSDBU in carrying out their mission. One tends to be reporting structure, and the other one tends to be budget and resources. And those are the 2 that stand out to us. It's very hard for us to evaluate certain cases where the OSDBU might say the contracting officials take care of that, because in some agencies, it might be that the OSDBU has created a sense of culture where the contracting officials are very close to serving the needs of small businesses and including small businesses. So it's hard for us to make that distinction. So we find ourselves coming back to, why did Congress set things up in this way? And it makes sense to us.
Okay, and finally, let me ask this. I know that SBA, Mr. Jordan, asked for 24 full-time employees. Are you devoting any of these employees to the PCRs and the CMRs?
Yes, absolutely. So the exact split is something that we'd be working through based on the implementation of the analysis we discussed, but it would be to handle those oversight and fraud, waste, and abuse prevention functions. So yes, you would have more PCRs. Yes, you would have more CMRs out of that, in addition to looking at how can we best handle the size protests, status protests, and surveillance reviews, which are also ongoing continuous improvement projects that we do in discussion with the OSDBU community, GAO, and Congress.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Chu. My questions are going to be all over the board, and while I think I have a feel for who they should be directed to, please, I encourage you, if you feel like you can contribute something, please feel free to chime in. In no particular order, I think my first question is to Mr. Scheer and Ms. Park regarding the mentor programs. In fact, I think maybe it's to everybody. How much uniformity is there across the differing mentor programs of the different agencies? And is there any system that is set up to help deal with somebody who might want to participate in the program at the DOD and then go over and participate in it in the GSA? And if so, is that system working? Mr. Scheer, we'll begin with you and Ms. Park.
Your direct question we didn't address, the ability of small businesses to participate as proteges, let's just say, in multiple programs. We didn't look at that. We know that when you have 13 programs and there hasn't been a lot of evaluation looking across the programs, and I'd say ours is, again, kind of like a first effort of just trying to describe them.
Can you cross? Is there any value to crossing? If I run a small business that does 3 or 4 different things and I want to do a job for the DOD and I want to participate in that mentor program, is there any demand for then? Do I learn what I need to learn about all government contracting if I'm a protege in the DOD program? Does it carry over to GSA, or do I have to? Is it there a benefit then for me to go to GSA separately?
Yeah, I'll answer that by saying that there is a benefit of going to each agency separately, and where that it's not strictly a one-sided answer, but the issue becomes, what as a small business am I providing, and what agencies have supply chains that I could fit into best? So I won't say that there shouldn't just be one mentor-protege program across the government. I know there's some interest in that, so I can't opine on that one way or the other. But the challenge with that would be to ensure that businesses that can be successfully a part of one supply chain but not others are really incorporated, by a mentor-protege program. So the role of the individual OSDBU in running the mentor-protege program becomes important. At the same token, one of the things that we certainly discussed a lot looking at our 3 reports together, and it kind of points to like the interagency task force that the president created and the role of SBA with the various OSDBUs, is there a way to kind of identify best practices or a certain structure where you can fit out what is the appropriate role for the OSDBU and what is the appropriate role for PCRs and the various entities, because they bring a different tool mix to the table. How do you reconcile all of these? And these really come to a head when you start talking about the roles of these various entities in running mentor-protege programs. So it's a two-sided answer, but it's one that there are benefits to some businesses. If you have a business that can be part of the supply chain of multiple agencies, there could be a benefit of having one program. There certainly would be a benefit if the programs were a little more transparent and there was some standardization to those programs. But for the that could leave out certain proteges that might fit in best with basically the supply chain in one agency.
Ms. Park, do you want to add to that?
We do collaborate with other federal agency program managers of the other Mentor-Protege programs. Our program manager, Tony Island, does meet and talk with the other agencies' programs. To what extent there's uniformity across programs. I don't believe there's 100% uniformity either in the application process or who can participate, depending on what kind of small business category you're in. So there's probably opportunity for that to be streamlined. I can imagine that the business community, fewer forms or fewer applications, fewer agreements would be a good thing. But we do see that there are participants in our program that are also participants in other agencies' programs. We each agency has our specific mission and our specific supply chains and looking to develop a supplier base that supports our mission. So there surely is a specific mission for that each Mentor-Protege program is supporting. Certainly with GSA's wide contracting vehicles, we do serve a broad range of industries that also support other agencies' missions. So.
If we were to, and I recognize the fact that one of the complaints, complaint is too strong a word, but one of the concerns that you raised, Mr. Scheer, is the sort of the lack of evaluation, the lack of input, the lack of transparency. But if we had a chance to talk to the firms who had been proteges, what would they say is the best part about the program? What does the Mentor-Protege program help them with the most? What's the hardest part about being a government contractor, and how does that problem get solved through the Mentor-Protege program? Start with you, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you. So when Congress passed the Small Business Jobs Act, which asked SBA to expand our 8A Mentor-Protege program to include hub zone eligible firms, women-owned small businesses, and service-disabled vets, we wanted to figure out that very question, how best to do that. And so as part of a 13-city listening tour, we asked small businesses, both who had participated in our program or perhaps had participated in another Mentor-Protege program or hadn't yet participated, what was the benefit they were looking for or had experienced. What we overwhelmingly heard is that it's a great opportunity to learn from somebody who's done this how to do it. There are various kind of shades of that answer, but it was essentially, we don't yet have the capability or capacity to do this. It's really hard to just learn by reading the FAR.
But is that paperwork? Is that development technology standards? What is it?
Well, so that's with our 8A program. We specifically say that mentor and protege who want to come together, the mentor needs to prove it has a defined skill that meets the protege's defined need. So sometimes that is marketing. How do you get in front of federal agencies? How do I sell to the government? For other people, it's the back office systems. I don't know how to set up, defense or DSCC compliant accounting systems and all these types of things. It depends on what that protege needs, but it works best when it's not just a mentor and a protege saying, hey, we both are in a similar industry, let's figure out how we can best go get contracts, but rather the protege has a defined need, the mentor has a skill there that they can help build the capability and capacity of the protege, they come together, and then the key question is, how do you provide a mentor a true incentive to want to do that? Their businesses, it's not always altruistic, so there's got to be some incentive, either DOD funds theirs, we waive affiliation so they can form joint ventures. There's a series of those, but make it a good enough incentive that they do come in, but good enough controls that there's not the fraud, waste, and abuse that you could see.
Gotcha. I guess we'll leave for another day the problem of how it got so complicated in the first place that we have to have this program. Let's talk about goals and accomplishments. Ms. Park, you had mentioned some numbers, and in all candor, I probably lost my notes on them, but regarding the number of jobs that you folks have helped create and the success of the program. Could you give me those again? Do you have those?
Sure. We have 123 new jobs, 54 new subcontracts, and then on prime contracts, let me flip to that page as well.
And there was a huge amount of money, several $100 million.
$260 million.
That's what it was. So here's my question, because it sounds great, and I congratulate you. This is not a slam on the program at all, but I guess my question is, what did it cost us to get that?
We have one program manager, full-time employee, who actually splits his time between this program as well as really being our service-disabled, veteran-owned small business champion in the agency. And they really are overlapping and, very complementary duties. If you think about it, we have, certainly a commitment to increase opportunities for veteran-owned businesses in federal contracting, and more than half of the proteges that are in the firm are veteran-owned companies. And so it really is a streamlined and efficient program. I think we have our program manager, Tony Island, who is really committed to meeting face-to-face with the businesses to help walk them through the process. I think the paperwork we have in place is streamlined. It's just a couple pages. We assume that folks coming to the table, can, have their business plan in place and their financials are in place. So it's
generally less than one full-time employee. Is that
yes,
what you're telling me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's helpful. By the way, Mr. Jordan, to the extent we would put something on our websites for our constituents who want to do this, is there an overall website on how to do this? Is it part of the SBA? Or if I wanted to get in the Mentor-Protege program, where would be the one best place to go?
SBA.gov for sure, and we will get everybody exactly where they need to go.
Thank you. Mr. Scheer, let's talk a little bit about accountability. It sounds like you're getting a lot of the same treatment that the committee got in terms of folks who aren't responding or responding essentially saying that we don't think we're breaking the law. Is that a common occurrence when you try and look into these programs, or is it a new development? And what do you think is causing it? Is it just bureaucratic red tape?
Well, I'll just make kind of a broad reaction because you're saying compared with other experience. Most of the time whether it's agencies or individuals have a statutory responsibility to do something, there's normally some type of implications of not complying, that there is some sense of punishment involved. And it seems here that, we did this evaluation almost a decade ago. It's getting pretty close. And you had agencies not in compliance, and you still have, those agencies not in compliance today weren't compliant at that time. And it doesn't seem like there's been any harm from that. So
what would be an appropriate sanction for that? Seriously.
I can say is that you would think, we kind of say at some point, we can point out, but there's certain value judgments on what the severity of what you could say the deficiency is and what the reaction is. What we took the prerogative of doing, which was in a way was creating work for you, was saying these agencies that aren't in compliance, maybe we can push them a little bit if we say at least you have to come up with our recommendations don't carry legal sanctions either. But the idea is if you have a reporting responsibility to Congress where you have to justify this, it creates some burden of proof. From your standpoint, you sent letters. That's a great, that's more than I think what's happened in the past. If you have oversight hearings, I think that can help. There's a lot of things that can help. But as far as what is an appropriate legal sanction, that's where I just say that I don't have a basis to say what the right legal sanction should be. But it's quite clear there's a number of agencies that haven't taken these requirements seriously.
Well, and we will be asking those folks to come in. To the extent sitting here is a sanction, I guess we'll get them to do that. Jumping around a little bit to close up, Mr. Jordan, you mentioned Form 70. Did one of your PCRs issue that to the Coast Guard this year on insourcing?
Yes, sir.
What was the outcome of that? And the only reason I ask is we've had separate hearings on insourcing. I just read your rules yesterday that you promulgated, I guess, on Monday. I assume that was you folks on insourcing. So what was the outcome of that one?
So it is not yet resolved, and I'm happy to follow up as that progresses. There's still a lack of clarity as to whether or not the Form 70 authority applies to insourcing, since it is not. It's almost the reverse of a contract. We're not stopping a contract from going out. There is no contract anymore. So that's what we're trying to work out. Again, if there's one thing I've learned over the last couple of years, it's that when we always rely on adversarial type tools, we don't get the same progress as if we work collaboratively. So we are working closely with our counterparts at Homeland Security and Coast Guard to try to figure out what is going on with that situation. Is there something thematic that we can do more? And like you said, Dan Gordon, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, just re-released very clear guidelines on what's inherently governmental and closely associated, and we're working with them.
And again, I don't want to get off topic too much, but since it is something we've spent some time on, do you think that the rules that were issued on Monday will help bring some clarity to that specific situation?
We haven't gotten yet the information as to their precise rationale and impetus for insourcing the particular contract or function that you're talking about.
Correct.
So I'm not sure if it was due to a cost savings, which was one of the previous issues that drove insourcing, or whether it was because there was inherently governmental or closely associated function being insourced. So I don't yet know. And
staff tells me they have some information that they might be able to share with you. So thank you. We will continue to follow insourcing, by the way, throughout the course of this year. Let me see. Ms. Park, Staff has a couple questions, and this is a good one. Under the Act, the SBA, you are supposed to have supervisory authority over personnel carrying out the functions of the SBA, of the Act itself. Are you able to do that? Is that the case? Is that working well?
I do have supervisory authority over the staff that I have in central office or do report directly to me. There are about 11 staff members. And we have a network of regional representatives across the country, another about 24. And so together we carry out the functions of the Small Business Act. And in the different regions, they report to the head of contracting activity for the Federal Acquisition Service currently with a dotted line reporting in to central office. And so we do work closely together to carry out the responsibilities of the Small Business Act. I would mention, going back to your previous question about the half full-time employee that manages the Mentor-Protege program, the whole network of employees on the OSBU staff do support the program as well as part of overall duty, so I would be a little bit misleading in saying it was just one full-time, half a full-time employee, to clarify that.
Just a second. Clearly, we would consider that a success. Are there goals for your Mentor-Protege program? Are there specific goals in terms of the number of jobs, the number of contracts awarded, the number? Are there any specific goals? When you start on we start the new year, I guess, next week or 2 weeks from now, October 1st will be the beginning of our fiscal year. Do each of these programs have specific goals they're setting out to accomplish for FY 2012?
For SBA's Mentor-Protege program, which is part of the 8A, it doesn't have a programmatic specific goal, i.e. contracts awarded, dollars, those types of things. What it has is for each individual Mentor-Protege agreement, those are good for a year, and each year there's an annual review where SBA business development specialist talks with the protege, the small business in our program, and says, you laid out a plan for what your specific needs were, how this mentor was going to help you. Did that happen? Can you show it to us? Because each one, like I said, has a slightly different metric for success, but we want to make sure we're looking at that every year.
But at the your GAO, your GSA, I lose track of all the letters. At the GSA, do you all have a goal for next year?
Well, similar to SBA's approach, we don't necessarily have specific targets for contracts awarded or dollars won. We do have an internal goal to have 100 agreements in place by the end of the calendar year is what we're looking at. But we really are taking the data and what we've seen the past 2 years to see if it makes sense, given kind of that baseline, to see if it makes sense to establish specific goals. What we don't want to do is box in the program to be just about the contract dollars and the jobs won. We want to make sure that there's room to define success by the different business capabilities that are developed. Certainly, what are the specific needs of each business coming to the table? I'll give you one example that's not about necessarily contract dollars or new jobs, where the large business scale and training resources can be helpful. If there's an ISO or CMMI IT-related certification that's fairly expensive, that costs thousands of dollars to obtain, the smaller business could, and has been, in a couple examples, been invited to participate in the training that the large business is already paying for their own employees. And so that's a clear benefit that's not necessarily defined in terms of contract dollars and jobs.
It is, but going back to Mr. Scheer's original point when he started, what you've just mentioned are very admirable qualitative goals. That makes it very hard to measure, though, doesn't it, Mr. Scheer? If that's what we're chasing, if we have to look at everyone on a case-by-case basis, every single Mentor-Protege program to say, was that individual program a success? Or should we have quantitative goals of some fashion to make your job a little bit easier? And they'll still be friends with you either way.
There's answer, because when we look across the programs, there's a lot of attention paid to the actual agreement and the needs of the protege, and and I think both witnesses characterize that well. But there are certain things that are looked at, such as how well the proteges are doing while they're in the program, and we at least wanted the agencies to consider to look at how well they've done, even after they leave the program a year or two, such as the way DOD does. So there's advantages of trying to create both. The concern sometimes, if you try to create too many quantitative metrics, is what becomes your baseline. And we recognize that many times you say, well, there's been job growth among the proteges this year. How about if we saw a decline, which at DOD you did see, when the recession hit. Well, you have to put it into a context, and you have to have some sense of putting it into perspective. But quantitative goals in looking at how well proteges do can be very useful.
And if I could just add, Mr. Chairman, the difference between quantifiably tracking these things, which we're really trying to push on, and setting goals in advance, as Mr. Scheer said, is where some of the challenges. So we have 7,000 8A firms, approximately 500 Mentor-Protege agreements. That's more of a process programmatic data point. Then you look at outputs. So how many contracts do they get? How many contract dollars? And we do track those metrics.
Right.
But really what we're driving towards are outcomes, and quantifying what those desired outcomes, or defining what those desired outcomes are, and then quantifying is where we're really spending a lot of time trying to push our thinking so that we can track whether these programs are actually successful in the goal of the program, which is to develop these businesses for long-term growth and sustainability.
Last question, I promise. You've mentioned a number. One of the quantifiable goals here is the overall SBA goal of the 23% participation. I mentioned in my opening statement 20% from last year. You mentioned 22.7%, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about $500 billion worth of contracts, it actually is a lot. What's the difference between those two numbers, Mr. Jordan?
Without seeing the exact quantitative inputs that you're using, what I'd surmise is that we're using the same numerator of $98 billion in prime contracts to small businesses.
I got 109,171. So
well, let's use your number. I like that better. Yeah. So we're pretty close in that the question is what constitutes the denominator, which for purposes of goaling, we use small business eligible dollars, which is a subset of all federal procurement dollars. So in 2010, the all federal procurement dollars spend was roughly $530 billion. The small business eligible dollars that we use as the denominator was $432 billion. And so that's how we get to the 22.7. What drives that delta is a set of spend categories that have long been excluded, things that don't have to play by the rules of the federal acquisition regulations, so either specific agencies like FAA or specific types of work done OCONUS outside the continental United States, foreign military sales. Those types of things are removed from the base. Now, I know it's a constant source of discussion and one that we have had and will continue to have with your staff, but the important thing from my perspective is when I joined, we had just had 3 successive years of declining performance year after year. So instead of worrying about adding to or moving from that list of exclusions, we said we want an apples-to-apples comparison as we fix this process and these programs to see if we can move performance in the right direction. And as I said, we, over the last 2 years, have had the largest increase in over a decade, having not added anything to nor removed anything from that list. So that's where we were, and now we're happy to continue the dialogue of what comprised that delta.
We may do that. We may follow up with you in writing, because that is one of the things that I know everybody on this committee tracks, because that 23% number is burnt into our brain from the very first day that we're here, that's the goal. And you know where I'm coming from, which is that we just don't want you folks to say, well, 22.7%, that's close enough. We want to continue to have folks push, and I know that you're doing that. Listen, thanks to everybody who stuck around. Thank you for waiting during the break. As always, it's an honor to see someone sworn in on the floor of the House, so thank you for accommodating us in that. We look forward to having you back sometime soon. Please do send, to the extent you have friends at the Interior or the Treasury or any of the other folks who haven't responded to us, that this was a really good experience, I hope, today, notwithstanding the fact it took 2 hours. It's not going to be as much fun for them. So if you could let them know that we are serious about getting the information that we've requested. So thanks very much. With that, we're adjourned.